and thank you for joining today. This panel is on producing sustainable advertisements. And today we have James Nicholson, who is Creative Partnership Director at The Mill, Darren Khan, who is Chief Commercial Officer at Click-On Group EMEA and founder of Traveller, Joe Fenn, who is Project Art Director at Green, and I am Natasha Patel, who is APAC and me, editor at Little Black Book. So let's kick off with, what do we mean when we talk about sustainable production?
So maybe I can jump in and answer that. Hi, Natasha, thanks for having us today. So when we talk about sustainable production, it's really how we put together a shoot or a sort of project with the smallest footprint, smallest carbon footprint. So yeah, at Green, we talk about that coming from 4 different activity areas. So transport, so how we move everything around, not just people, but product, as well as kit. How we power all the different spaces used to create pieces of advertising, what materials we use, and then what we do with them at the end. So if we dispose of them, and if so, how, or if they're hired and they go back to where they're going, or if they're donated, etc., etc. And we always talk about things in that order. So transport, spaces, materials, disposal. And that's because transport tends to have the biggest impact, and how we kind of get rid of things at the end tends to have the smallest. So for a long time, there's been a big focus on recycling, for example, but in actual fact, it's really about, whether the emissions are baked into a script such that you need to fly a crew of 10 people around the world to create this piece of work, or use a particular person who's not, where the agency or production company are based. So really, it's about creating a piece of work with the smallest impact possible. And the calculator that we put out recently sort of helps people to understand where those big impact pieces are. So that's what we mean when we talk about sustainable production in sort of ag green terms.
Cool. Darren, James, anything to add?
No, I think that sums it up in terms of, I think it is about just the footprint, and I think exactly as Joe says.
Cool. And so if we look at the automotive sector, what experiences, if any, have you had with sustainable production?
I suppose the one, obviously, the case study we'll go on to, and I'll let Darren talk more about that. But obviously, that's a good example of how we started to think about it. But I think more and more, it has been something where clients are starting to see what they're producing is, electric vehicles has become a focus for automotive. And I think, sustainable production is linked to that. And they've more and more had to demonstrate how the electric vehicle that they're making is also, and the way that they're producing it, it now needs to also reflect in the adverts that they're trying to make. So, it's exactly as we said, it's how do we reduce travel days? How to reduce shoot days. It's a weird thing because the technology we use kind of automatically helps reduce some of that stuff. So, for example, by making stuff in CG, whether that was a choice or not to become sustainable, but it suddenly helps. And I think it becomes, as Joe says, it's like using these calculators and teaching these techniques will suddenly show people that, you don't necessarily have to go off and shoot for 5 days. You could go off and shoot for 2 days and do a CG car, or as we'll come and show, maybe you just make everything in CG. So there's a number of options that automotive brands are starting to see. I think we've just got to teach them how to use it and show them how it works. I think, and as we say, this case study is a good one. I mean, the Mill invented this thing called the Blackbird, where they had this car which you could reskin. Now, that seemed to be a sustainable option, but then we had to fly it around. So again, technology advanced, and we now don't have to fly this device around. We can now shoot on any wheelbase size car, and we can skin that. So all those things, the one drives the other of the kind of the way that kind of car brands think about these things.
It's sort of driven by new innovation, different ways of thinking. We'd obviously been kind of thinking about that since 2018, and it, like James said, made sense as the industry moved to a more electrified industry, that they would find new and interesting ways to create the content. I think some of the things, probably hesitant, but it's probably more James than me, is quality. So does it affect the quality? And I think we proved on this case study it didn't. Can it drive innovation around thinking? I think that's the other thing. It can drive quality if you approach it differently and think about it right from the beginning of the process. I know Joe's a big advocate of this, not trying to sort of, make decisions after you thought the idea, actually think right from the conception of an idea Is there a better way of doing it? And I think more importantly, the output that we're all making is ultimately to connect with audiences. And with all the sort of plethora of platforms and formats that are now being introduced, it does make sense to look at new innovative ways of creating content and then personalizing it, and start understanding different audiences will want to be advertising slightly different ways, which you can do more of this obviously in CG and post-production than just going off and shooting. So I think, you know, it's quality, it's innovation, it's, you know, ultimately it's media, connecting with audiences and personalization.
And I think the planning, you know, I think like you just said, Darren, the planning has become something that I suppose the mill traditionally were always at the end of the chain. You know, we were always the people that you came to fix something. I think involving us and AdStream and Trevor at the start, and all sitting there as a group and actually go, look, this is the way we can produce it and this is the final output. You're suddenly going, okay, well, we do, you know, we can now do this as a live action piece but we don't need to travel for this. We can do this as all those things become kind of part of the process. And I think there isn't this division between pre-production, production and post-production anymore. There's a group of people that if you put the right group of people together, they can make it sustainable and they can make it creative, but it's just getting that balance right. And I think, you know, a few times stuff has come off and we've not used it properly, you know, and sometimes we have. And I think it's the way that creatives use this tool set is going to be the interesting thing. You know, the case study we did as a very traditional approach. You know, we opened up a CG package, we went through a long-winded way of doing it, going through to where we are now, only kind of 2 years later, where we now would have done it using a games engine, and we all would have been on a call and planning it that way. So I think it is really interesting the way it is all evolving.
Yeah, I know you guys have both touched on the case study, but let me just get a question in there as well. So can you walk us through MPC, the Mills and Traveller's sustainable automotive production case study, please?
We worked in partnership with MPC and they were working with their client, and I'll kind of touch on that in a sec, but we were specifically involved in the shooting of the live plates, the live action part of the script that the MPC and the agency and client came up with. And it removed, I mean, obvious things. It removed, you know, sending people. We had 4 teams on the ground that were sort of vetted and checked by MPC, and they had all the relevant kit and experience in shooting cars, which is obviously super important. But it removed things like even moving, and James has touched on this, moving the physical car. The closest showroom for Land Rover was in Oslo, so it would have meant taking a car on a trailer to port and onto a ferry and back off in Iceland and then transported. You know, all of that removal is a huge thing that people don't think about, the actual moving around of the physical vehicle. And obviously what it allowed us to do is, obviously it would have been, you know, one vehicle, one colour. And obviously what the output was eventually, and I'll leave James to touch on that, but was, you know, multiple versions and different colours and different specs. But it was a really interesting project, and it was sort of really smartly directed by MPC at their end, directing our team in Iceland, and I think the output quality, you know, it's not detriment, and the savings were huge on time, cost, and more importantly, carbon. I mean, it reduced 83% versus the sort of more traditional model. So it's not just nipping at the edges, it's a huge impact.
It'd be great to hear where that sort of 83% reduction, sort of where the big pieces of that are, just to sort of illustrate for those who are listening, sort of what the biggest things were that were sort of not done or not required that created that massive shift, because 83% is huge. It'd be really interesting.
I think it's that thing. And again, automotive companies, a lot of the time their cars are embargoed. So even if we'd taken the actual car and we'd shipped it and we'd spent all the money taking it, we probably would have had to have changed it all anyway. So you'd have shipped this car, we'd have taken it to location, we'd have started, you know, and in terms of practical time to move, you know, that one car around, because we probably would have only been able to bring 1 or 2 to the location. What you can now do is you shoot something with a similar size wheelbase, you know, you take any car and we can track it, skin it exactly like we did. So I think there's the transport of the vehicle, but it means that we can run vehicles from the location. We can use that same car. We can have a couple of those done, so your shoot time is reduced. So all of those things add up to, you know, what is essentially more cost efficient, because the client's not paying to ship stuff, but also more effective because we'd have ended up changing most of it anyway. And as Darren said, we could then, by making it as a totally CG car, you can change the color of it, you can go back to it any time. And I think, you know, by pre-planning what we were all doing as well, we all knew specifically how long we were going to shoot. We weren't running, you know, hours and hours of footage. We knew very specifically what we wanted to capture in those times. It was easily briefed, you know. A lot of the creative was done before we got there, because we discussed, actually we need it at this angle, that angle. All of that adds up to that saving in the kind of the whole footprint of what we were doing. I think, you know, some of it is about the sustainable side of it, but some of it is about practicality of it. It's actually technology is driving stuff, and it's a balance. It's kind of like, well, you know, these things actually work for a car brand, and I think, you know, by having things like the calculator, you know, they can then, on the end of this, they can say, look, we've shot in this way, we've not had to have, you know, security and this on set, we've done all this in this way, and we've saved it. And, you know, and so I think there's a couple of benefits that work, particularly on this whole thing, you know. And some of the stuff we used, obviously Darren's team shot for us, but some of it we also went back and used footage that had already been shot again. So we're saving, you know, we're using stock footage. So we're kind of almost reusing stuff that actually fit. And all of these things are adding to the whole creative piece.
Yeah, certainly. And I know, Joe, you've mentioned the carbon calculator, and we've heard it a few times. So can you tell us more about that, and also about AdGreen's initiatives and what they hope to aim for in the future?
Of course, yeah. So AdGreen has two aims. So it's really about enabling the advertising production community to be able to measure the impact of their productions and then work towards reducing them as well. So we have sort of several offerings that we put out into the industry. So first of all, we have training. So that's an online 2-hour session for anyone really who touches on productions, that as well as the production team itself. That might also be creatives or account teams, anyone who's sort of involved in explaining what the production might look like. Then we have a resources guide as well, which is sort of split out into activities by different sort of departments or roles and responsibilities. So for example, there's a section for creatives, another for the production team, right down to sort of the dining bus driver on set. It's a sort of, if it's a shoot like that. And all of those actions are split out into those 4 different areas I spoke about before. So transport, materials, spaces, and disposal. And then we have the carbon calculator, which I guess is sort of, in a way, the jewel in the crown. It's the piece that really allows people to understand the impact of the things that they're actually doing. And we launched that tool in September last year, and it's built to be collaborative. So the idea is that an agency who's working with a production company, as well as potentially service companies, they can all contribute their own information to a project's footprint. So it's not about one person filling in everything, it's about sharing that responsibility. And the tool also allows the brands to actually have an account too. And as soon as that brand is tagged onto a project, they can then see the sort of top line information about it to help be a part of that conversation too. So really it's about driving sort of collaboration with regards to this. It's not just about sort of saying, oh, someone over there, you deal with it the night before the shoot. This is sort of, how do we deal with this from the start together and kind of move forward? And, you know, the tool itself, obviously measuring doesn't mean reduction necessarily, but it gives you that insight as to what kind of things you might want to look at. And you can also then use the resources guide to help you do that. And we're looking at bringing in, we're not sure if yet if we'll call it certification, but some kind of certification type process later in the year to really help shift that reduction in the industry as well. So sort of using your influence as a production company or an agency or whatever role you might have to sort of help shift the infrastructure in the industry to make operating more sustainably more easy. So that's really what we're about.
And so what has the industry's reaction been to the carbon calculator?
It's been pretty positive. We launched in September. I think we've had about 345 projects through the tool so far. So that's sort of active projects. There's been a large take up from both agencies and production companies across the UK, but also outside of the UK. So it's not something we actively promote outside the UK at the moment, because we want to make sure we've got the support there to help users when they're using it in those countries. But That's something we're looking at with some international partnerships. But yeah, it's been good, and obviously we've been learning from our users and how they're using it. So we've been developing some extra sort of help resources over the last few months. We just put a lot of FAQ on the website, for example. So we're sort of learning how it's being used and what people are using the information for. And over time, we'll also develop our own metrics for that data set as well. So we'll start to look at whether it's carbon per pound, carbon per 30 seconds of TV ad created. That would be something we sort of come to look at later in the year once we've got a bit of a fuller data set from our first year of use. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting to see people using it after a long time, sort of developing it with other people in the industry and understanding what they want to get out of it and how it might be used.
Sure. And so is sustainable creative production essential to the future of advertising?
I think it has to be. Yeah, sorry, James, just jump in. I mean, you know, I'm sure you agree. From my point of view, it can't really be done any other way, but it's about not compromising on the creative aspect and making sure everyone can do it in a way that works environmentally but retains that level of creativity, which I know is what you guys obviously are big fans of, having done that piece of work together.
I suppose it goes back to this technology thing there, doesn't it? It's like, you know, you think of traditional Hollywood film shoots and the rest of it, and, you know, the days and days that you'd use, and, you know, things like cameras become smaller, and then you can shoot more and more effectively, and then that gives you a more, you know, so I think it's just making sure that, so you're saying, you know, is it sustainable production will happen if it keeps advancing. You know, computers are getting faster, so we can produce, you know, things faster on a computer. We can create 3D cars rather than shooting real cars. We just need to make sure that these creative things are also, you know, they have an eye on the fact that actually the impact is what the impact is. You know, I think we can say, yes, we can produce everything in the studio, but then we need to be looking at the mill studio going, how are we looking at our electricity usage and what are we doing, you know? So I think all of those things add up to creativity, and technology are being driven by, you know, technology to a level, but I think everybody's got this, you know, eye in the background on the reality is we have to be able to produce this in a different way. We can't afford to be flying around the globe, and there's no need to, you know. And I think as computers get faster, you know, we talk about this traveller film that we've just done with, you know, with Jaguar Land Rover. The thing that we didn't have in that was actors. You know, we didn't talk about how we might use actors, but the next thing that, and we would have done now, is actually gone to an LED stage and used those backgrounds and shot on location with the car in that place. So it's kind of a cause and effect that would kind of all add up. And I think weirdly the pandemic has kickstarted this even faster, because, you know, we went straight into, you know, lockdown. We weren't sure how everything was going to work, and one of the first jobs we did was a virtual shoot for a car brand, you know. And the only reason we did that was, it wasn't, you know, we can't say, you know, we did it because we were trying to be green. We did it because we had to, you know. It was something where suddenly we were forced to change the way we were going to do it, and we were all on a call and we were all talking about a shoot, and we were kind of making it up as we were going along. But the good thing about that is we had the post-production guys and the production guys all working together, and we don't know, you know, it's like we don't normally speak, you know, you don't normally have all of these people, and we were getting happy mistakes, and it was actually driving creativity to a different level. So I think definitely the whole thing with technology is at the moment hopefully pushing kind of the way that we produce in a better way.
And I think brands, you know, we're talking to brands, and brands from a very, very high level need to look at how sustainable their marketing activities are, you know, from programmatic desks, trading desks, through to, like James said, you know, the electricity output, and then adopting, and I think, like James said, experimenting. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, is there? It's experimenting. You're going to make a few mistakes in the way. You've always got an eye on creativity. Is absolutely key that the outputs is engaging with consumers. But I think it's just, it kind of, like I said, it has to happen. The pandemic's made it shift, but I think out of it, everyone's much more creative in their approach. I think all we would say, and I know Joe would hope in every meeting that we have with clients, we start right at the beginning, and going back to James's point, is let's be involved right from the start. And I think together we can overcome some challenges and make sure that we're still have the sort of guide rails on creativity, but at the same time always benchmarking and measuring and exploring different ways when it comes to, you know, sustainable production. So I think it's here now. I think it has to be.
And does greener, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, and I think, look, with creativity, you're still always going to have good and bad ads. So I think, you know, it's the way that the creatives use it and that we all do it. And I think that's going to be the challenge. There's going to be some stuff that you go, you know, and there's going to be some great stuff. And that's not the technology's fault. That's kind of how we all come together and work it out.
And so does greener production mean more expensive? And also, how does this impact quality?
I think this is one of my favourite questions. There's such a myth out there that sort of being greener costs more money. And I think over the last few years, I've really enjoyed sort of taking this question on, because personally, I think the answer is no. You know, in most cases, carbon follows cost. And I'm sure the guys here will have specific examples of where this followed through on their job together. You know, I totally appreciate that not all things kind of, you know, what gets lowered in one part of the budget might be higher somewhere else, and there's a knock-on effect. But, you know, if you are, say you are going to shoot abroad and you're looking to, you know, take 10 people, whatever it might be, if you take 5, you're going to save money. You know, you're going to save money on flights, on accommodation, on per diems. There might be other crew expenses locally, but I would have thought be lower, because that's why you probably are taking them off. There's obviously the carbon impact too, and obviously I hope that will be more considered in the future, and that might be the primary reason going, you know, into 5 years' time that people might remove those flights. But generally speaking, if you're doing something less, you're going to pay less for it. So, you know, even if you're producing less waste and it's weighed by the bag, how many bags are picked up by the you know, the waste contractor, if you're giving them less rubbish, you're probably going to pay less for them to take it away. You know, so yes, there might be a sort of a time investment in some places, you know, whether that's from crew standing by the bins and thinking about which one to put their, you know, their can in, or whether it's about taking a train and that takes a bit longer instead of flying. You know, I genuinely do believe there is savings to be made in making your ad in a more sustainable way. And I'm sure these guys can elaborate, because, you know, a lot of that was part of the sort of case study that was put together for the Land Rover job.
But I think, you know, as Joe said, it's also about the format that we're making these things for now is not one format. So, you know, traditionally you could go off and do one thing, you know, particularly thinking about cars again, is you could go off and shoot your one ad in this. You know, you might actually, if you shoot your plates as clean, you can reuse, and there's a life to that, to the kind of what you're making. And, you know, you don't necessarily have to, you know, you can come back in 12 months time and you can upgrade the model of your car in the same ad, you know, and that goes through from not just from your online content, that can go to your shopper content, your web content. So all of that is a saving, and it's green, you know, and it's something that is kind of all based on the original concept car. 12 months later, they update it. There's a massive saving, you know, in doing that. And you might have only done a 2-day shoot rather than shooting the real car for, you know, 10 days. We did one for Lexus where I think we ended up shooting, I think it was like 2 days in a desert. And they've continuously used those plates to just upgrade the models, you know, and it's like one of those that's ongoing. It still looks beautiful. It still looks amazing. It's still got all of the impact. The level of creativity is there. But there's massive savings, you know, there's massive savings in doing that. There's no cost to ship the cars there. There's none of that stuff. Is, you know, it's a plate, you know, it was all previs before we went. So we knew exactly what we needed to capture in camera. The number of days shoot is, you know, all of those things add to what is effectively a more creative ad.
I agree, absolutely. And I think on the particular project, the Land Rover project, I mean, it was all measured. So we did a measurement on time, which is about 35% less time, and cost was about 34%. But I think it's when you then look at, I suppose, organisation and think, if we, again, going back, did 100 of those, 50 of those, then you really start to see savings in all areas, in your carbon output, your cost, and your time. And you know, I think, on James's point and sort of my point about the output ultimately is going onto some kind of media vehicle. It allows you to just keep changing, keep adapting, using data to adapt. You can target different audiences, different colours, different spec, and all of that couldn't be done the traditional way. Well, it can be done, but it's going to cost a lot of money. and a lot of carbon output. So I think, you know, it's reusable content, and if it's shot in the correct way under the right spec and direction from, you know, the mill, MPC, and the creatives, then you can keep sweating that content over and over again as new ad formats come out from TikTok or Facebook or one of the media organisations. So yeah, there's huge savings, absolutely.
I mean, if you think about, I don't know, a car variant from, you know, a left-hand drive, right-hand drive, you don't have to do that. You know, you can shoot the one or the other. We can jump on a Teams call and we can change the shot. You know, they go, actually, in Spain we want a red car for a certain, you know, and so we want a green car. We can jump on it. We can move the camera around. All that content, we can use the background. If we go to the extreme, which I think is where it might go, is, you know, you're going to be doing less, you know, live action plates, more plates that are generated. All that stuff means you've got more control. I think the question becomes is the quality of the output. At the moment, you know, it has to be done well, and I think, as I said, there's been some good and bad examples of the way that's done, but I don't think that affects the overall creativity of what's done, and it definitely makes a saving on the way that you're spending, you know, your carbon, you know, time and footprint.
James, you touched upon my next question, which is about creativity. So how is creativity impacted when sustainability is prioritized?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, as I said, it's kind of, it does depend on the advancement of the technology and where it goes. It's a learning thing, you know. I think, you know, you look at a car ad that was done in CG 5 years ago and you look at one now, I think, you know, the leaps and bounds of where it's gone from, it's just become technology's driven that, because computers have got faster. That's, you know, again, I touched on the pandemic. I think speed to produce content has influenced that. That wasn't a sustainable issue. It wasn't something where we'd gone, oh, we're going to do this. And I know I probably thought the virtual production would have been 5 years away, but, you know, we literally just shot a Mercedes ad this weekend, you know, where we've done people in an LED studio. You know, we've not done many of those, but we're starting to see it more and more, where actually it helps the creativity. It helps the, you know, it means that in Germany, the German cars are moved to the, you know, 5 miles down the road. It's all done in the same studio. So a lot of this creativity is trial and error. And I think, you know, that's what we'll see. And I think we'll see some happy mistakes. We'll see some bad ads, but I think we're always going to see that.
And have there been any unexpected upsides to using new sustainable production techniques?
Like I said, I think one was just the crews being together. You know, the having the, you know, traditionally we'd go to a set and say we'd send a supervisor, and the VFX supervisor would be going, can I shoot a backplate of this, and can I do that? And they're basically getting on the you know, the service company, the production company's nerves, because the longer you spend doing the backplates, the less time you can shoot. Whereas by being together at the start, you can all plan it, you can all make the mistakes. You know, having a Teams call is nowhere near as expensive as, you know, being, you know, the hours running away, or if you're running film or anything like that. You know, it's, I think so in that way, all being together, and, you know, you've got a traditional DOP going, oh, when I move the camera that way, you get this effect. And then our guys will learn and go, well, should I try this? And I think there's a natural bounce from production and pre-production that you just wouldn't see. You know, I think those two worlds have always been very separate. And I think this now is bringing two creative worlds closer together, and we're learning from filmmakers on how they use cameras. And we're showing them how they use CG, and it's, you know, it's starting to use that together, and we're getting, you know, happy accidents going, that's the way a light would work. You know, DOPs are going, if you just move this way or use a cut, all those things, you know, we wouldn't have the time on set to do that. It's the same as, you know, when we went from film to digital, suddenly we could shoot a lot longer because of the cost of film. You know, we could shoot longer times and more of it, but now we're going, you know, but in some ways that was adding to the cost of actually producing. So we now need to go back from that and go, okay, let's be efficient about the way we do that.
So if you think about any particular automotive brands you've worked on, how have sustainability efforts in their ad productions tied into the company-wide sustainability efforts? I think within that, we were looking at more like, you know, big brands, have they come out all these pledges and promises and stuff. And so how have those fitted into, I guess, your guys' experiences working with those particular brands? Or have they not come into play at all?
I think it goes back to this thing that obviously all automotive brands, you know, it'd be difficult to kind of make one kind of a singular reference, but all brands are going electric. You know, all brands are saying that they're producing stuff sustainably, and I think so. Part of that sustainability has to be reflected in the way that they not only produce their cars now, and they, you know, but in terms of that message, it has to reflect in the way that they write the creative and make the creative. There's no point in kind of going off and shooting, you know, saying that the next car is this electric vehicle, and then we go off and drive a, you know, petrol vehicle for 5 days across the desert. You know, I think so because of the way Automotive had advanced, because of the way they're all competing against each other to try and, you know, be seen as kind of sustainable. This is the message. You know, everything we do in production now has to be reflected in that. As a, you know, like I said, with it, we did a thing for again, I mentioned Lexus, where they've ended up doing a car that we did the first time we did it with a car that we moved around locations and we skinned it. But once we had that car, the next set of ads then became made in the computer. And I think part of that then is reflected in their electrified campaign now, because it's like, look, we don't need to do that, and they can then shout about that. So I think it's definitely in the back of the mind, in the forefront of the mind, because that's the way that they're trying to be perceived at the moment. They've got a long way to go to kind of solve the emissions problems they've had for the past few years, and this is an example of it. Electric is that answer, and I think part of that answer is in the production process.
I think what's really interesting as well is that, you know, with these brands, they're making such a big shift in terms of how they actually make their product now, that their commitment is so obvious. You know, you might be working with another company where it's kind of like, we have these kind of goals for 2030 or 50 or whatever it might be, but it's not really necessarily resulted in such a big shift in their actual core product. It's just that there's changes to the supply chain that maybe are less visible to the consumer. Whereas I think for automotive, it's such an obvious thing that's being done that it can't help not be talked about. So the production then to follow is in a way an easier conversation, because you've already opened the door by saying this product is this way where it used to be this way. So how can we kind of follow through? You know, it's a bit like when you sort of remember being on shoots as the production manager, and you'd be on a shoot for a yogurt brand, and they'd see some other yogurt brand on the tea table at lunchtime. They'd be like, "What's this doing here?" You know, they're sort of very conscious of that sort of connection. It's the same sort of thing. You know, we've got this electric car. Why are we chugging a diesel generator to make this piece of work for it? You know, there's a bit of a more visible connection. I think it's really useful.
And there's also a lot of there's a lot of car brands out there, and there's a lot of there's a lot of market. So they have to be seen. Not only, you know, this model might change every 6 months. They need to be seen, and they need to be in the forefront. And part of that is in the way that they advertise that. And I think, you know, that is what the consumer's asking them for. It's like, not only are they saying they want to see that this is made in this way.
No, I was going to just back those 2 points up. Is I think it's such a powerful consumer message, but also, you know, a people message. You know, as a business, I don't know how many people Mercedes, all these car manufacturers employ, but it's going to be hundreds of thousands of people. And I think there's generations of people coming through within those organisations where that is a really important part to join in, you know, A or B. You know, I think going forward, so to attract great talent, it might be a choice between a sustainable, non-sustainable business as the, you know, generations come through. And then secondly, a really powerful, if, you know, you can talk to, as we are, to Clearcast, and having that conversation, substantiate and verify, as Joe was talking about, verifying what we're doing in some shape or form, and then being able to put that on your communication, especially your TV ads. This is all made, you know, net zero or 100% carbon free, whatever it is, then immediately that's going to resonate with a bigger and growing set of consumers going forward. So I think there's huge benefits, and like Joe said, you can do it now. we're talking to not a car brand at the moment, and we're going into their business and looking the way they produce their output, and because they realise it's something they can do now. The supply chain can take quite a while to come through, which is why a lot of the dates are 2025, 2030, 2040. But if they're smart, there's enough people just sitting on this webinar that could go into an organisation and help them change in a couple of weeks' time. It's something immediate that they can do.
And so what are some of the most interesting sustainability hacks or fixes that you have seen?
I think maybe I can answer that. I mean, I think it's interesting to see what people are doing and how they're approaching things. I mean, there's another project out there that we've sort of been talking to the production team on, actually quite in the early days of the production, about how they could actually make a completely carbon-free shoot. And it was for a particular transportation brand where that was again important to their kind of whole ethos of the brand. And we saw it's a Hitachi ad. It's now out, and it's been out for some time, but we're going to actually discuss it at our event we've got coming up. But there'll be a case study like the one we sort of looked at for Land Rover. But they actually powered the on-set lighting and a big projector with pedal power for the actual project. So the way the ad was made was actually brought into the creative, so it kind of almost like broke the fourth wall of production, if you like, and sort of became the way the ad was made. And they still face the same challenges in actually putting together the logistics of the shoot. They still, as much as they tried to have as many electric vehicles as they could, they still need to resort to a couple of diesel ones because of the infrastructure that's just not there. But they sort of went above and beyond for the actual shoot electricity, if you like. So that was powered by pedal power and a solar generator for backup. So there's lots of interesting things that people are trying out, but I think, as you kind of touched upon there, Darren, the sort of infrastructure takes much longer to change, and try as people might, not everything is available for every project in every location. I think that for us is our next big focus. So when we do have a kind of certification scheme or whatever we call it, it's going to be about the sort of influence that you can have as a production team, and the influence your heads of department can have to try and make those bigger shifts happen, because without those, there's going to be a ceiling on what anyone can do on any given project, with regards to what's available. So I think that's the kind of big picture, and that's what people are starting to realize as they try and push the needle on what they can do. They're realizing there is this kind of at some point there is a barrier to how much can be achieved. So it's not for lack of ambition. I think in a lot of cases it's we're waiting for the infrastructure to catch up in terms of sort of products and services and what's available.
We found that on a few shoots we've done where you've ended up things like polyboard. You don't want you kind of want them to reuse the stuff that they've got rather than kind of generate something that's green, because as you say, you turn up on a set and they've only got a certain amount of stuff. You might as well use what's already been there rather than trying to tick that box and then generating and producing something else. I think those are the hacks, I think, like you say, that will come, but it does depend on where you're going and what that infrastructure is. I think that the one hack for us, I think, is just the fact that we can plan it all before. I think that's the biggest thing. These games engines and the real-time software that mean that we can, rather than looking or jumping on a call, and even for the Land Rover one, it was all grayscale models and all you weren't understanding. Now you jump on it, it's like a games engine. It's looking pretty close to what you might get, and everybody understands it. I think it just helps people kind of visualize what they're going to make in the end. It's easier for clients to sign off because they're not just looking at odd shapes. It looks almost like the film they're going to make. I think that's a real big leap in where we're going, and we'll definitely get faster.
If you are out on location, you're shooting, to switch your catering to vegan, because it's just a really easy win. You're still providing a meal for everyone. There's such an amazing range of vegan food nowadays as well. People are much more open to eating it, and I think it just knocks off just an easy bit of carbon from your footprint. It's just such an easy thing to do, and if anyone complains, obviously welcome to bring their own lunch as long as they know in advance. So I think that would be my top tip if I had one.
I have been on, and even in the last 5 or 6 months, I'd say 60% of those people that I've been shooting with have switched. I think and it's something that you don't think about. And I don't think anybody would even notice. There's been the odd few that would say about it, but I think most are just happy that if the food's good, the food's good.
I'm very conscious of the time, and sorry, my internet just messed up there. So the last question is, where would the three of you like to see sustainable production go in the future? Who would like to start? Jo?
Sure. So I think for me, we've touched on some of this already, but it's really for brands to sort of engage with their creative and production suppliers to sort of say, we are aiming for these things. Here's how you can help us. And I think one of the big things we haven't really quite seen yet, and I'd love someone to correct me if I'm wrong, is a brand sort of sharing what is in effect a carbon budget for the year as well as a financial one. So to sort of say, look, we have this allocation for this year for our production. Can this be achieved? Is this feasible? How might we break this down? What might it look like? We want to produce a big brand ad, several other little pieces, whatever it might be, and sort of have that conversation as well as a financial one. Because I think then that's when a real shift will start to happen. Because if that isn't possible on that carbon budget, just as we might say on a financial budget, then we can start to look at why. And it might be that, well, you want to shoot all of these things in these countries. So if you want to do that, you're going to break your carbon budget. So can we look at how to do that more effectively, whether it's, a sort of, games engine type work, or whether it's shooting more locally, if it's live action, lots of different things. So I think for me, that's where I'd love to see this heading. And I think it will go that way. It's just taking a little bit of time for the sort of the concepts to filter through, for the people to understand what tools are available to them, and for that sort of thinking to just be normalized. But I think that will happen. But that's I guess if I'm being a futurist for a second, that's where I see it going, and that's where I hope it goes as well.
I think to add to that, Jo, I think it's exactly that. It's the education. I think it's kind of, we can do it, but if people don't know we can do it, they fall back to traditional. A lot of traditional creators, they write an idea without being informed that actually, if you did it this way, you'd have more creative freedom. So in terms of the future, it would be people, speaking to people like ourselves and going, right, exactly that. We want to do this. This is what we're trying to achieve. This is what we're trying, this is our aim for carbon neutral. We'd like to get, how can we do that? And I think that is the future. Even though the tech will keep advancing, I think it's kind of having an eye on that, but also just chatting and going, right, well, the opportunity for that is, as Jo said, we can either shoot those plates locally with that crew, and we send out one person with a drone, or we send out 20 people on a shoot. It's like you still get the same result. I think that's the future of production. It's just we're a global community now. We are talking globally. We should be actually using that network properly.
Agencies or production companies aren't really in control of the production carbon budget. It's the work they're given. Yes, they could in effect turn down a piece of work if it was a high carbon piece, but I don't think we're at that point in time yet. Really, it's about making sure there isn't the high carbon work in the first place to be turned, to have the need to turn it down. It's, so it's really about that collaboration and conversation, because this isn't in the control of the agency to kind of reduce their production carbon budget. It's about the brand helping them to do that and collaborating with them.
Great. Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Natasha.
Thank you.